Okay, Dylan, if you were your evil
Yes?
twin, what game would you write about?
Oh God. Okay. I feel like this question implies that there's like an evil video game out there, but
Yes,
which there is, but like the ones that are not funny. Like
that's
there's like banned video games. Like there's like
that's a very true point.
how about let's just mess around here. I'm just gonna say evil Super Mario Brothers. Let's
Oh,
just say that. Let's say there's evil Super Mario Brothers.
you
Instead
know,
of Mario, you're Wario. There you go. Easy.
oh
Very
yeah,
Super
simple.
Mario Brothers.
I was gonna
Yeah.
ask
Okay.
if Mario has like a mustache, and the evil version. That's normally like the thing you put on somebody to make them evil. What would Mario
Oh,
have?
so no mustache, right?
Yeah,
Like it's like
a clean-shaven
exactly.
Mario.
It's a very friendly looking, clean shaven Mario. Is the
That-
most evil thing you can imagine.
It's the worst thing
Yeah.
possible. Okay,
It's just the scariest thing you've ever seen.
okay, hi guys. I'm Patrick with Royas. Tate's out sick today, and this is Dylan. He has written for Did You Know Gaming, Gaming Alexandria. He's been featured on Wired and Kotaku and Lost in Cult. If I got all of that correct.
Yes, you did.
Perfect. And so we are going to be talking about how to talk about your video game today, because I think a lot of game developers don't actually know how to talk about their video game. Me specifically, this is something I've struggled with when talking with publishers. Is getting them hyped about my games. So I figured Dylan is an absolutely fantastic person to talk about with this. And so yeah, let's dive right in. So let's say, okay, do you think when let's just start talking about social media right away. Do you think you should brute force a platform that isn't giving you traction right away? Because I know you and I briefly talked about me hiring you for my social media management, and Tate and I have found with Royas that we get some platforms accept us right away. Like Bluesky, we immediately posted on there and got like likes and traction, whereas Twitter, we got absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So what's your thoughts
I
on
will
that?
say, yeah, I will say it's a hard thing to narrow down, obviously, because like as with anything on the internet, it's all like constantly flowing. Because especially I found this out doing some stuff where it's like, oh, I would promote the exact same article, it's written the exact same way, it's posted at the exact same time on Twitter and Bluesky,
Uh-huh.
but the audience, what used to go absolutely viral on Twitter is just crickets. And on Blue
Yeah.
Sky, it's like a seldom. It's like a little bit of a rumble, but it's also because Blue Sky's in its infancy. And then there's the other sites that like I don't know, we're still doing Mastodon or whatever the fuck. But like, yeah, no, it's kind of all over the place. Admittedly, I don't really have a real answer for this beyond like throw stuff at the wall and see what sticks, because admittedly, even if a Twitter post doesn't make a bunch of traction, there will be some response no matter what. There'll be one like, and it's going to touch one person that's still on X, the everything app, and not Blue Sky. Yeah.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And it's also like, especially like different social media platforms, like it's obviously, this is a more broad discussion about like social media management, because I've done stuff like outside of like the video game sphere, but it's like, okay, the way you would present stuff on Twitter is way different from how you would present stuff on Instagram, and how you present stuff on Instagram is way different from how you would present it on YouTube. And
That's
it's
very
all different
true.
audiences, it's all different like styles of editing, it's all like different times to like get the person's attention. It's
Yeah.
a lot, but yeah.
Yeah, and so I think it's probably best if you're a small development team to focus on the ones you know, because it takes a long time to learn the rituals, and you kind of have to use the platform to know how to speak their language. Yes.
Yes, absolutely. It's internet speak. It's it's lingo. Look at like try and think of like some of the big brands that like go viral on the internet, where like Wendy's used to tweet just like a Twitter user, or like the big one now is like Duolingo, where it's just like, oh, the Duolingo bird's a TikTok kid. They're posting all these funny TikToks. Like,
Oh, I haven't even
yeah.
seen the TikTok. I just saw the Duolingo bird died by
It's just
getting
like,
hit by a cyber truck or something. That was being
is that what
driven.
it was?
Yeah, I think it was.
I just knew it died.
My roommates told me
Yeah.
it was killed by a cyber truck that was being driven by the Discord avatar character thing.
Oh, that's okay. I don't want to be like all hail the brand, but that is pretty funny.
That's
It's,
actually really funny.
yeah. And it's also like, yeah, again, like it's just like it's ever changing, it's flowing. Because remember, like, well, like 5 years ago when it was like, oh my god, Mr. Peanut is dead. Oh no, like, and that was a completely different style of advertising than whatever Duolingo's doing right now. Like,
Absolutely. And just
Yeah, like-
staying on top of that, especially as a small team and all the platforms, is difficult.
yeah, and it's especially with a smaller. Yeah, like if it was a smaller group, like say, like you're working on like an indie game, or like you're working on like an independent film, or something where it's probably just you and some friends. It's definitely, obviously, it's a lot harder, and you have to be a little more blunt with your advertising.
Yeah.
Because like Duolingo and stuff, like it's a household name, so you don't need to be like, you don't need to introduce your advertising with like, hey, we're this company, we do this. Like, you already know who we are.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas a smaller thing, like something you're working on, it's like, you don't know who we are. We're this. In a way that's not like a bunch of corporate speak, a bunch of like robo talk.
Make you
It's just like,
approachable.
hey, well, yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I really like that. Yeah, that's good advice. Is I think a lot of people try and come in and be too corporate right away.
Yes. Yeah. Like, honestly, some of the best stuff. So at least for me, like what some of the best stuff I've seen selling like independent stuff like that is like, I'll see a thing on Instagram of like, you ever just wake up and you want to make an independent movie? I did that. Here's a clip from my movie, like, or stuff like that. Like,
That's amazing stuff. Yeah.
yeah,
I really
yeah.
like that. Yeah, it's kind of like that. Have you seen Joel Haver? How he does that annual make a movie during the Oscars, where you have to film a whole movie while the Oscars is airing, and then you publish it to YouTube. It's such a fun event every year.
I'm not aware of that. I knew about his it was like one movie every month. No, I did not know that. Yeah.
He does it every year during the Oscars, and he turned it into a competition for a while. And so there were some YouTube channels that like kind of got bigger off of that. They use that as like a platform to elevate themselves, because you get to see a lot of people's personalities and their first instincts when they're doing something like that, right?
Yeah. That's always a good. Yeah, I guess that brings into like a broader discussion about when you are like a smaller group, that kind of drive to create and that kind of thing is so nice. Of like, here's like someone else set a deadline and you're just gonna do this deadline. It's nothing serious. If you don't make it, you don't make it. But hey, you should make it, and then hey, you get the promotion. You get something out of it. You have a good experience out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did a bunch of like doing stuff around in the city. I'm from Calgary, living in Calgary right now, but from Saskatchewan. But I've been doing some stuff around the city of like, oh, it's the annual 48-hour film competition. It's the annual 24-hour film competition. And I know a lot of people doing similar stuff with games of like, here's our 48-hour coding jam, and I hear from people being like, some of my best work comes from that stuff, just out of like, I have a deadline, like, and I can just get my own voice as blunt as possible out there. I'm not overthinking stuff. I'm not reconsidering stuff because I don't have the time to. And honestly, sometimes your best thought is the first thought. Like,
absolutely, I can't agree more. And I think a lot of people try and make sure everything's too polished and take all the edges off, but sometimes those edges are what people connect with. That's where the thing people latch onto. And as a small studio or an independent creator, that's what you should be targeting, not this perfect, it'll be appealing to everyone thing.
Yeah, the human factor. Of it. Like, it's like, oh, yeah, like a human. which is weird when I say it in terms of games, because then what I immediately think of is like, oh, it's fine if there's a glitch in this game. That means a human made it. We're only human. But like, no, like, Like, yeah, like a clear sign that there was like that a group of people made this and all their distinct voices went into it. I guess is a better way to word that, but yeah.
So,
Yeah, that's. Oh, sorry.
oh no, go ahead.
Oh, I wasn't. Yeah.
Oh, okay, my bad.
Yeah.
Okay, this is very well laid out. Okay, so what do you think some game developers can do to make their game easier to digest or write about? Because you work in video game archival, right? Or
Yeah.
and so you kind of find a lot of lesser known things. Me specifically thinking about your Sega VR.
Okay. Yeah, I'll add a little bit of context to that here in a sec, but I guess again, a lot of my work comes in like the archival circles. Some big ones. A website you mentioned earlier, Gaming Alexandria. We operate out of Oklahoma, but then we got workers from like me from Canada. We have like a writer outside of the Netherlands. We have some people in Chicago and in Oklahoma and Los Angeles, and it's this big thing. It all deals in archival stuff. On a similar note, there's a nonprofit in Emeryville, California. It's called the Video Game History Foundation, which has worked with some big companies to kind of like say like, oh, if you have these old like faxes lying around, if you have these old design documents, any like source code, like donate it to this archive and we're going to put it there. Maybe put it in our library. So if a researcher wants to look into something, then they can go search up their archive and find like say like Halo, and it's like, oh, I want to figure out who made Halo. I want to look at the source code for Halo. I want to look at the design documents for Halo before it was called Halo. And all that to say is that a lot of my work has been in archival fields.
Yeah.
And I find a big thing about that is, again, this goes back to like finding that human connection in a game, because like when you're doing his archival work, it's also a lot of historical work.
Exactly.
And doing that is looking at older games. The main kind of story that you always kind of have to find is like, okay, this is a game, but like, where did this come from? Who came up with this? Why did they come up with this? Are they still around? Let's go talk to them. Which I think you can definitely bring that into a more modern, like talking about modern games of like, hi, I'm Patrick. I made this game. It's like, here's how I came up with it. Here's how you can play it.
Mm-hmm.
Here's some basic facts about it. Yeah, like again, just like not just selling the game, but just selling the fact that you made a game. I guess is a way to word it. Yeah,
that's a good idea. So people are connected to you more than they're connected to the game, and then your connection makes the game interesting. The human.
Yeah, connection. Exactly. Because like admittedly, like I've said that like I've said this elsewhere, and a lot of people from like Gaming Alexandria or the Video Game History Foundation are kind of have the same sentiment, which is that a lot of old games are really fucking boring. like when you look at the broad scope of things, you're like, okay, as an actual game, like this isn't anything. Like some of this stuff is just a game. Mm-hmm. But where the interesting part comes in is like looking at, oh, who made this? This game is bad, but why is it bad? Who made this? Who came up with the idea? Was at some point like there's probably some intervention from like a producer or something. Maybe things changed during development. Like let's try and find like an older version of the game. See if it's probably better than the current version. Like a lot of the interesting stuff you find about these games doesn't actually come from the games. It comes from the backstory of it. It comes from the historical context. Yeah,
and I think that's a really good way to market your game then. Is figuring out how to tell the story of the development.
Yeah, actually, you brought it up, but probably a good example of this was a project I worked on a couple years ago. I think like 2021. In 1993, right as like virtual reality was like starting to hit like the home market. Like it was a thing just like the 70s, but like early 90s was when like, oh, you could go to an arcade and do a little virtual reality game.
Yeah.
Sega of America was going to sell the very first like console attached VR headset. It was going to be for the Sega Genesis, and it was this big, bulky, black and red device you'd put on your head, and you could play like 4 games, and all of them were like a space shooter or like
Oh wow.
like a dinosaur hunter. They were all like very basic, rudimentary VR headset games using a very specific type of code.
Oh.
And suffice to say, from people like I looked into this never came out, and I talked to a bunch of people involved with the production for this, in collaboration with the VGHF,
Mm-hmm.
and it was stuff of like, like I talked to the person that designed the headset. I talked to like the president of the engineering company that was contracted out to make it.
That's
It
crazy.
was like a company in Australia, and they were making 4 games for the headset. All of them were canceled, and all were by different developers all across North America. And I reached out to all of them, and for one of them, you can look this up if you just Google Sega VR. You'll probably find this. It's probably one of the first results. The main game they were going to make was this little space shooter. It was called Nuclear Rush, and it was done by a bunch of programmers, I think out of like Electronic Arts. Like they started like their own little like indie game developer, and they made like a team of 6, made like one of the very first like virtual reality games on the Sega Genesis. And I talked to the president of that company. His name was Kenneth Hurley, and we talked for a while over email. And he's like, "Oh yeah, I remember working on that. That was like 30 years ago." And eventually he gets back to me with like, "Hey, I was doing some spring cleaning. Check your email." And it was the entirety of the game's source code for this canceled game.
That is so
And
cool.
working with some engineers and like some code experts, we were able to like get the game up and running and able to run on like an Oculus VR headset.
No way.
And I say all this like this story of like, yeah, Sega put so much money into this VR headset that never came out. All these companies across the globe to make this game. To digging it up 30 years later and making it run on like a modern VR headset. All of this to say that the actual game, Nuclear Rush, it's fucking garbage. It's so bad. It's so bad. And again, like Kenneth Hurley will admit it, he's just like, yeah, this is a bad game. We didn't know what we were doing. We were just kind of told to do whatever on a weird type of code. But yeah,
You're just figuring it out as they went.
Yeah, and like. So, like, when you're just presented this game, if it just kind of came out on a random day, like, because that stuff happens where people, like, are at a yard sale, or like, oh, my dad used to work for Nintendo. I found this old canceled game, and they just put it online to no fanfare.
Yeah,
if
it's boring.
Nuclear Rush came out with no fanfare, people would be like, what is this? This is garbage. This is boring. This is nothing.
Mm-hmm.
But it got a whole bunch of traction out of, like, here's the story behind this. Here's the guy who made this. Here's how we got it running on a modern VR headset. Like,
So
here's an entire oral history attached to this.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah. Like,
and you were just,
No.
and this game had no following before, I imagine. And then you were able to take a game that was gone and never really supposed to come out and build an audience for it.
Again, like, yeah. And when you say it didn't have a following, like, the game never came out.
Yeah.
Like, so,
How can it have a following?
Yeah, and I think, like, before we, like, put out our article, there's some websites. I think, like, a big one is, like, Unseen 64. It's, like, a list of, like, all the unreleased games we know about on, like, every console. I think their article for Nuclear Rush, like, used a picture from a different game. Like
it was that unknown.
like, no one... Yeah, it's like no one knew anything about it other than a name. Yeah. And you just learned, like, the wildest stories from this, from talking to people. Like, specifically, going back to the headset, like, I talked to, his name is Mark Pierce. He was, an engineer at an Australian company, whose name eludes me. But they were the people contracted out to actually design the headset. And if I remember correctly, because this was a couple years ago, the way it was worded to me was like, people's necks broke when they put on the headset. It was so heavy and bulky that, like, when people were testing it out, it just went like,
oh no!
and it got to the point, in Mark's words, I remember this specifically. It was Sega buried the patents because they're like, we can't sell this. This will hurt children. We're gonna like burn these patents. We need to like.
That's really
like,
cool, actually.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Just crazy stories, like yeah.
Because my brother and I actually, when Oculus first was becoming a thing, we would talk about it all the time, and we were always very interested in the Sega VR, and we were like, why did it never come out? And then when I met you, actually, Dylan and I met in improv. That's why we did the evil twin bit, is Dylan was my evil twin in one of my first improv shows.
I totally forgot that you were in that seat. Yes.
Yes, you were my evil twin.
Improv.
And then I remember meeting you, and one of the other improvisers was talking about you doing the Sega VR thing, and I was like, oh, that's so cool. I've always wanted to know more about this. And here's this person who knows more.
Yeah, actually, that's a funny story, because I admittedly am like, I'm humble about this, but also like, it's a weird thing where like, I don't know how I bring this up in conversations, because if I just like I'm not gonna be on a date and I'm like, yo, you heard about the Sega VR? But no, so it doesn't come up much. So I think it was like in like the little server of like the improvisers in Regina. I think it was a quick shout out to Matthew Lang, who awesome I brought dude. Up this as awesome dude. We love Matthew, but brought up in a side of like oh yeah, like I've written for like digital gaming, if you know about that, and written for that. Oh yeah, like I was published one time. Yeah, it was great. And then Matthew replied of like, oh, tell us more about the Sega VR headset. And I'm like, okay. I'm not used to this kind of question. I'm not used to people I know in real life who know this, like
that's such a cool feeling though, having them be able to ask such a specific question about your work.
Oh, it's wonderful, but at the same time, I usually, when I am telling people this, it's just like, yeah, I write about Mario. Yeah, like you ever played Mario
without a mustache? Evil Mario.
That's a callback. We're gonna. You should do improv, Patrick. This is good.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, we should definitely do improv together sometime. This would be great.
What? Just a quick aside. I haven't because we were doing improv together in Saskatchewan, and I came up here for Calgary for a school, and then I help run the University of Calgary's improv club. So I'm in the festival circuit.
Yeah.
And I was a boy on Christmas when I went to the Edmonton Festival for the improvisers, and I saw Patrick just hanging out.
Yes, I was so happy when I saw you there.
I dropped my bags, and tears came down my eyes. Like it was.
There was a slow motion hug.
Yes. Yeah. Everyone cheered.
It was a beautiful moment. And then we built a table, and you sat there and pretended to smoke a cigarette.
Oh, okay. Now we're okay. I'm sorry to derail this conversation.
No, it's totally
chat. Fine. Okay, but for context, because this is like a lot of like university improv, it's a lot of like weird in jokes that I cannot explain.
No,
and this weird stuff of like, let's do this because it's funny. Like, if I say the word clipboard, a certain subset of people will absolutely lose it. I don't know why. It's stuff like that. Like, but yeah. For one show I did, this was at this Edmonton festival. I made a deal with two performers from Regina of like, okay, when the Regina people perform, can I be the guest like third man on stage? But I know you guys have like 2-man sets planned. I want to be the third guy on stage who gets up there and is like cheering and having such a good time and like getting suggestions from the audience and like running around the stage. And then the minute the scene starts, I just pull out a chair and I just sit there. I just sit there stoically for 10 minutes. And then when the set's over, I'm like, nothing. Yeah! Oh my god, yeah! Oh my god, next scene! Oh my god! Okay, sorry, what's your name? Okay, can I get a suggestion? Okay, that's awesome. Let's start to see 3, 2, 1.
No.
And then just sit back down and do nothing. Like
I remember fist bumping you after you got off stage, being like, "Great set, dude! Great set."
Yes, like it's like I'm told I have an amazing resting like bitch face. So like I can just sit in a chair and I just don't move my face and look stoic, and I just look upset. I'm told I look really, really mad. Like,
yeah, you did look annoyed.
Yeah.
You looked like you were just waiting for your time to jump in, but you were just sitting there.
It never came. It never came. I was just edging a whole audience. Yes. Anyways, yes.
Okay, let's get back to it. That was a fun aside, though.
Yes.
Okay, so what makes you want to dive deeper into a game and look further into it? So, like, I assume obviously you come across a lot of games and say, there's nothing here that I care about, and you move on. So what catches your attention about a specific game?
I find a lot of the stuff I have looked into is either it's like a Sega VR scenario where like, oh, this did not come out, or this is very obscure or very rare, and I want to figure out why. And more for like this is specifically for like historical stuff, but it is like if something about this game is very historically significant, but we don't know why or where this came from, that's something I want to look into. Like, because there's a lot of stuff that people don't think about of like, oh, what's the first game of multiplayer in it? Oh, what's the first game with passwords in it? No, people don't really think about that.
That's true.
And people don't really like sit down and think like, okay, who actually came up with that?
Yeah.
A fun example. This was not me. This was another researcher named Kate Willard. Great person. Look up, shout out Critical Hit on YouTube. You want to see some great videos. I'm a voice in some of them.
Oh, really?
If you want to hear some Dylan mentions, but
if you want to hear Dylan even more,
if you want to hear me even more, maybe be even more insufferable elsewhere. No, they looked into a thing that you know in like Mario Kart, when like before the race starts there's a little countdown of like 3, 2, 1.
Yeah.
So I never thought about this until they looked into it. That doesn't happen in a race. Like
really?
in an actual NASCAR or like a drag race, it's just like they just start the siren and you go.
I never even thought of that.
There's like, where does that come from? And it comes from like, it goes back to I think like an Atari game from the 70s, and like they talked to the programmer. He's just like, yeah, it just worked better in my head to have a little timer. You don't think about that. It's like in my mind, I'm like, that's a thing you see at like a race car, like an actual race car event. But no, it was just some random programmer, and then it just kind of stuck. And I think people honestly probably just do it in real life now. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the last racing game I played that didn't have a 3, 2, 1. I used to play a lot of Need for Speed World back in the day.
Oh.
The Need for Speed MMO. And they had it.
Forgot they did that. But no. Like little stuff like that of like, where does this thing that you don't even think about come from? Like, what is the etymology of like a video game history? There's so much stuff has just been lost to time.
Yeah.
A bit like, or even not even like, people often do get stuck in like the first of it all. Mm-hmm. Like, what's the first game to have this? What's the first game to have that? There's just like a lot of stuff that just has like a weird quirk to it.
Mm-hmm.
A specific one, to give an example, is there's a game for the Nintendo Game Boy. It's called Faceball 2000. Have you ever heard of Faceball?
I haven't.
Faceball is one of the very first. It's a very good name. It was originally a computer game, and then got ported to the Game Boy, which is going to sound insane when I describe it because it's one of the very first-person shooters. It's a 3D first-person shooter operating on a Nintendo Game Boy. Imagine like Wolfenstein on a Game Boy. It's like that. It's like
that's insane.
Like I think before Doom, before Wolfenstein, there was this game called Faceball, and you would walk around this little maze and you would shoot these little like Harvey Ball smiley faces, like the Be Kind Always, like
that's funny
smiley faces from like the 70s, and so like in addition to being like one of the first FPSs, the Game Boy version of that game. Mm-hmm. So like on a Game Boy, if you might know, they have like these little link cables where it's like, oh, if two people want to play Pokemon, they can attach this little device and they can like trade Pokemon.
Yeah.
Or even crazier, you're like, oh, for some games, I think like a card game on a Game Boy, you can like get 4 players attached. No one knows how they did this, but the guy who programmed Faceball on the Game Boy made it possible so that you could not just connect 2 players, you could not just connect 4 players, you could connect 16 players at a time.
How?
If you had 16 copies of the same game and 16 Game Boys, and I guess like 8 like link cables, you could have like basically like a LAN party on the Game Boy.
That's wild.
And to this day, I think, as far as I know, to this day, people have tried every year at like conventions. People have tried to get 16 players happening, and it never works.
That's what I was actually going to ask.
I was like, people have tried and it crashes, but people like trying it out in an emulator, it works. No one knows how, it just does.
It just is supposed to work, I guess. But
yeah, so this was something that like eluded me for the longest time. I'm like, how the first of all, why? Why would you do this? Who has 16 copies of this game? Who has 16 Game Boys lying around in 1991? Second of all, it's like, how did you make a 3D FPS on a little handheld system that's 4 colors? And so I looked into it, and it was actually this was one of my first published speeches was by it was published by Lost in Colt, a British company, and I did a whole oral history on Faceball. I talked to the programmer who made it. I tried and failed to find the actual person who started the company. It was a company called Zenith, operated out of Vancouver, actually. It was a Canadian production. Oh. But, no, I did a very, very deep dive into this game, like tracking down the programmers, tracking down the ports, how it was made, and finally kind of figured out, like, okay, this is why they did this. This is what's interesting about this game. Here's how they made an FPS possible on a fucking Game Boy. Like,
yeah. That is super fascinating. A 3D FPS, nonetheless.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it's insane.
In my head, I'm trying to go through, like, it was a sprite-based machine.
How
do you do that in 3D?
Oh, God. I think you can look it up. Look up, like, Faceball 2000 is the full game, but it's very crazy.
Okay, I gotta do that.
Yeah. A small aside is that there was actually, weirdly, a lot of, like, 3D games on the Game Boy.
Oh.
If you know Star Fox,
yes,
the company who made that was a British company called Argonaut Software.
Mm-hmm.
And before they made Star Fox, their connection, they were doing stuff on like British home computers, but they got the license to work on the Game Boy, and they were able to do like full 3D simulators on the Game Boy. There's like a little racing game where you can like move the camera around and you're driving around this little car. But you can barely tell what's going on because, again, it's like a 4-color sprite-based machine, but it is like a little 3D car driving around. And because of this, like, the founder of that company, like, showed off their little demos at a trade show to Nintendo, and Nintendo's like, what the fuck? It's like, how did you do that? We made this machine and we didn't know that was possible. Would you like to make like first-party games of us? And they're like, yes.
Yes,
so they're the people behind. Yeah, they're the people behind Star Fox. All the technology that made that game 3D was done in the UK. So
that is, I had no idea about any of this. All that stuff's so interesting. So yeah, how do you go about then like finding those hooks for people to like connect to in a game in the same way you do? Do you just like go and say, "Oh, I found this interesting, so everyone else will," or do you try and like find a specific thing and go, people will connect to this?
I think I've had both. Okay. I've had both because again, like it goes back to like there's something historically significant about this game. I want to look into this because no one else has.
Mm-hmm.
But there is other stuff where like people have a sentimental value to it of like, oh, I've always played this game. Like I've seen a lot of people put out stuff of like, here's the history of this game, and I just want to start this off with a little prelude of like, this was my brother's favorite game. And like, I remember I would come home from school every day. We would play this game. So like, this is why it means so much to me. And even ever since I was a kid, I always wanted to figure out why level 2 did this. So then I finally figured it out. Like, there's little stuff like that. So like, you can have it both ways of like,
Yeah.
there's something historically significant about this, or also just for personal reasons, I have an attachment to this game and I just want to know more about it. And there's also like the mythical third option, which is this is specifically for like looking at unreleased stuff, like the Sega VR, where it's like, I have this thing, no one else does. Ergo, I have to be the person to talk about it.
That
like,
makes sense.
There's a lot of stories of that, of like even like I've seen like developers of said games like write stuff about it, but where it's just like, yeah, like I was at a yard sale, or I bought this thing on eBay, or like, oh yeah, my dad was a programmer and I found this lying around. I want to talk about this because I know for a fact no one else can talk about this because no one else has a copy.
Yeah, I know my brother and I used to hang around on a bunch of internet forums back in the day, and every once in a while you'd get like a programmer from one of these things who would make a big post and maybe 20 people would reply. And they'd be like, I'm talking about all these things that I did in this game, and here's this stuff, and you'd be like, oh, this is so cool. No one else cared.
oh man, I'm jealous because like I will say doing research sometimes I see like old like 10-year-old Reddit posts where stuff like that happens. We're just in a comment section, someone's like, hey, I made this game, and everyone's like, okay, and I'm like, no,
please, tell me more.
Why? No, please, no, tell me more, please. And I can't respond because it's a 10-year-old Reddit post, and like archived. Reddit disables comments. Yes. Reddit archives the comments. So it's like an Interstellar where I'm like seeing my family, but I can't reach out, and I'm like, it's
a tragedy.
Yes, help.
My brother and I have been talking a lot lately about how a lot of these old forum sites are shutting down, and so we're losing all this stuff, and we don't even know what we're losing. Like, this history is just disappearing into the ether, and we're going, no, please come back.
Yep. Oh God, you opened up a can of worms saying that. That is going back to archival studies. That is one of the worst things happening right now. Forums going away.
Oh, there's such a treasure trove.
Probably one of the biggest like archival forums was a forum called Assembler Games, which because of a lot of drama just completely shut down one day. No warning, just shut down. And we just have about like, I would say like 40% of it on Internet Archive, but other than that, so I've came across stuff with like images. I came across stuff researching of like, hey, I found this old copy of this unreleased game. Here's some pictures of it, and the pictures are 404'd.
Yes. No. I've come across that so much.
The little like tiny URL robot, and I'm like, no, fuck you. I hate looking at you. Like
you hurt my soul.
Yeah, you did this. Like.
Or the image hosting site no longer exists, or it was one of those 30-day image hostings.
No. It's a complete mess, and frankly, it's just like all you can do is just prevent it from happening in the future.
Yeah.
Which is just like if you're on a forum, if you're on Twitter, if you're on X, if you're on Bluesky, if you're on Mastodon, save your post, archive your post, put them on the Internet Archive. Because it could mean nothing now, but it could be mean a whole lot 10 years from now.
This is going to be where I shout out the Internet Archive browser extension that you can have it archive any page that hasn't been archived in the last 7 days automatically.
Awesome. Yeah.
It's brilliant. If you go to a new website and it hasn't had it, it'll archive it. If it hasn't been archived in 7, 30, whatever number of days, you can have it do that for you automatically. Definitely check it out because it's valuable. It's needed. Yes. And almost everyone, I think, especially developers, have like those weird little niche websites they go to where it's like nobody else goes here.
Like old like. Oh yeah, I love the amount of journeys I've done like through like old GitHub pages of like There's a specific story. I forget the specifics of this, but one of the founders of the Video Game History Foundation, shout out, his name is Frank Cifaldi, wonderful guy. been doing this stuff since like the late '90s. He's kind of like the first guy to really sit down and do this stuff, and he's still at it, still doing a ton of awesome stuff. But he worked with I don't know what you call them now, but he worked with Midway, same like around the like 1995.
That's a name I haven't heard in a while. Is Midway?
Yeah, that's why I pause. Of like, what are they now? Are they like Warner Brothers now? Anyways, yeah. So if you know the game NBA Jam, like the old arcade basketball game from the '90s,
I definitely do.
The same team made a baseball game, and this was never released. A couple cabinets were out there, but up until a couple years ago, one of the lead programmers, his name was Chris Oberth, passed away. Oh. And with him, his family actually reached out to the Video Game History Foundation and was like, hey, we have all this guy's old code lying around. We need to find this stuff. Can you guys get it preserved? And that's deep awesome. In the archives, they actually found this old baseball game. It was called Power Up Baseball, and they found the full source code for it, and they were able to kind of get it running for the most part. Like, they had, like, it was semi-functionable, but there was some stuff missing. And the only way they could get it fully running was to find a different piece of code that was not in the repository. But where they did find the code was just on a random GitHub page. A random GitHub page, I think, for like a clock. It was like code for a random place. It was code for like a microwave or something, like public domain code. And they're like, okay, we found this exact code. If we put it into the Power Up Baseball code, the game fully works. Like don't ask how we figured it out, but we figured it out.
That is such a random little story.
Yeah. No.
It works, I guess.
It's the amount of stuff you hear, just like random GitHub pages, or like, especially like old, especially in the 90s when you would have like GeoCities or like tripod sites of like, some of them are still up actually, you can, if you dig around, but it's just like old developers from the 90s being like, hey, my name's Todd, I work for Nintendo, here's my webpage, would you like to download these files of this thing I'm working on? Which is what people have found like unfinished prototypes and stuff that's on random web pages like that. Like, wow, it's crazy. Like,
and I assume a lot of these aren't even like indexed or anything for search engines, so finding them would be just the most random thing.
Yeah, no, it's the internet is an endless treasure trove. It's just the amount of random stuff you will find is crazy. There's I was an example I can think of. This was, I don't know who this was, because this is an old story, I think, going back to the 2000s. There was an unreleased game for the Nintendo 64. It was called Tommy Thunder. You can look it up. It's called Tommy Thunder.
Oh, I think I've heard of this one.
It was it's just like a little like Mario 64 clone. It's an unfinished game. Never really got announced. Never came out. But we have a prototype for it. And the reason we have a prototype for it is because back in the 2000s, someone like me was like doing random research, going through random web pages, and they found the web page of one of the developers. And it was just a thing. It was just a thing of like, hey, here's this game I'm working on. It's called Tommy Thunder. It's not finished yet, but if you type in if you answer the passcode, here's a zip file of the game. And really? So this guy brute forced his way into like on this 20-year-old web page and like brute forced his way through and got the zip file, and that's how we have this game. It was just sitting on someone's random web page, blocked by a password, but yeah, people figured it out.
That's really cool that they were.
Yeah.
And someone just uploaded it for fun to see if someone could guess the password, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's crazy. Like,
that's such a random thing to do. I couldn't even imagine thinking to do that.
I also just like why would you do that in the first place? It's also another question, but yeah.
That's awesome. So, do you use any narrative techniques when discussing these things? Because you just talking about this is super interesting. Do you use any like narrative techniques to walk people through the story and keep them interested throughout when you're writing about it? Or do you just say, this whole thing's interesting, here's the story in linear fashion?
Typically, our stuff is pretty medical of like, yeah, we're doing this in the most linear way we can.
Oh, for
like,
the archival aspect of it.
On the archival stuff, yeah, because like, especially like you're working close with like librarians, you do need to be very formal about it.
Yeah.
But in more like personal stuff, personal projects, it is room to experiment a little more, trying to trying to add a personal aspect to it, or this little like non-linear stuff of like, okay, we're gonna start at the end here. How did we get here? Because maybe the interesting part of the story is why this game was canceled. How did that happen? Or maybe the interesting part is like, who made this game? Let's go through their life story. Like that was going back to the story of Power Up Baseball. It was a thing. The guy who made that, again, his name was Chris Oberth. A guy, not a household name, but a guy who has worked consistently in the games industry since I think 1970.
There's always like silent people who've just been there forever.
Like he was I think the story is he's the second person to own an Apple II.
Wait.
The first one is Steve Wozniak. The second one is Chris Oberth.
So he's been there forever, ever.
Yeah, so he's one of the first guys to like code stuff on an Apple II, did early arcade games, did stuff for the NES, and did arcade games for Midway. Worked on like some like NHL games for like the PS2. Did a whole bunch of stuff until his retirement, until he passed away. And we put out some of his stuff. We put out some of his earliest code, some like an early racing game he made in the 70s. And admittedly, like the actual game was pretty rudimentary.
Yeah.
Started on the word there. But it was pretty just rough and nothing. But like without context, it's nothing. But we're presenting this with this full narrative of like, this is the person who's made it. Like, here's his life story. Like, what was he doing before this? What was he doing after this?
That's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, and there's also like, this goes back to talking about like the historical significance of some games, where like sometimes this historical significance is external.
Yeah.
Here's another random story. We were once donated not a prototype but a design document for it was an old Sega Genesis game. It was called Aftershock. It was a little like run and gun shooter game developed by a subsidiary of Sega in Chicago. It was a bunch of people from like who had experience in like arcades and like home computers, and it was a small group of people working on the Sega Genesis, and we're going to do a bunch of first-party games. This Aftershock game never came out, and admittedly, there's nothing specifically significant about the actual game. Like, there's no big first to it. Like, a lot of the names attached are admittedly not very significant. But the interesting part of it is the only reason we knew about this game was in 1995. There was a public access TV show called Rocks. Rocks was a Chicago-based public access show where these two guys.
That's very specific.
Pretty much just did whatever. Like it was very much like there's a like. The episode in question was like, here's our friend Jim. He works for Sega in Chicago. Check out this game he's working on. But they also just did random episodes of like, here's how to make food out of your microwave. Here's an interview with the mayor of Chicago. Like, just random stuff like that.
Just anything off the top of their heads they did.
Just anything. There's a weird one where they interview Noam Chomsky somehow. But anyways, yeah, so like all this to say, like the historical significance of Aftershock had nothing to do with the game, but had to do with the fact that there was an episode about it on Rocks, and Rocks is historically significant because it was the very first TV show ever aired on the internet.
Oh.
Yeah, the very like in 1993 on like Usenet on like a massive file. You could go on rocks.com and watch this stuff in very low quality. But it was the first thing. It was the first TV show you could ever watch on your computer.
That's so random.
And ergo, Aftershock is significant because it was one of the first videos you could watch on a computer. Was a preview for Aftershock.
A game that never came out.
Yeah, a game that never came out and is honestly not that interesting, even if we have a copy of it.
But there's these things around it that make it interesting. Wow.
So like the narrative can be like here's a story attached to the development. Here's a little more external story. Here's the story of the person that made it. Here's a story of why it was canceled. Here's a story about how it means to me, and it's all. The narrative can go all over the place. It's just a matter of finding that hook and presenting it up front. And then from there, when you can be a little less medical, how do you want to present that story? Do you want to start at the end? Do you want to start at the beginning? Do you want to start with a certain person before they even started on the game?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do you go about finding that hook as a developer yourself then? Because I think it's very hard to find your own interesting parts of your own story, I guess, on your development process, why you're interesting and everything. Whereas someone like you, you can identify that stuff pretty easily, I think. Definitely got a knack for that.
Again, I think it's like it's just a matter of what do you think is interesting about what you're working on, and you should make that a point to promote it. Do you think it like because you're a small group? I think do you want to like promote the fact that you're a small group with like different experiences working in games, or like do you want to promote the fact that hey, like not a lot of games do this, but we do. Here's how we did it.
Yeah,
I think it's just a personal thing of like you have to kind of sit down and be like, what is interesting about this game, and how can I sell that? And if not, how can I sell myself and ergo the game as a whole?
Okay, yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Because, I guess, like, for me, I work in medical research and video game research. But, like, and I think that's probably interesting in and of itself, but...
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And figuring out how to communicate that.
I think that is totally a good place to start. Of like, my background is not in games; it's in medicine. But I'm working on a game. Would you like to see the game? Like, it's,
even though the game may have nothing to do with medicine.
I have done you jest, but I have done articles like that of like, this is interesting because people that didn't work in games made this game.
Okay, yeah.
Like there's this goes back to the Faceball one. The guy who made that, I think was a doctor. The guy who made the guy who made the Faceball game on the Game Boy. It was the first video game he ever worked on. I believe he actually might have came from medicine. Like he just randomly picked up coding, knew a guy who worked at a company and said, "Hey, can I have a job?" Okay.
That's so cool. And that definitely happens. I know a guy actually who went to the doctor once, and he was a game developer, and he was talking with the doctor, and the doctor was like, "Oh yeah, when I was a teenager, I was writing my own game engine." And it's like, that's such a random thing.
Yeah.
But it definitely happens.
You would be surprised. Yeah, it's just... Yeah, I think that is definitely a narrative that people grasp towards.
Yeah,
like, I'm not from a formal background of game development, but I'm in game development. Would you like
Would you like to know more? Okay.
Would you like to know more? And hey, I'm working outside of the system. I'm doing stuff outside the system. I'm making my own game. Like
I'm doing things my way.
I'm taking games to strange new places.
I'm a rebel.
This ain't your grandmother's game.
A vigilante game developer. So how do you how important do you think nostalgia is when marketing your game? Because I know there's a lot of games lately that have been saying, "Oh, I'm the spiritual successor to this old game. Do you think that's an important thing to do, or do you think you can find your own narrative? Because when you're saying spiritual successor or whatever to this old game, you're kind of taking their narrative and placing it on yourself. Think it's more important to find your own, or think it's fine to just kind of borrow?
Admittedly, I would say yes. Maybe I am slightly biased because, again, like a lot of my stuff is based in historical studies.
Yes.
So I am.
And
like,
I love it.
So I'm taught, like, obviously I have to like add the nostalgia factor because I'm talking about stuff of the past. But I do think in general having that another good hook, which I've neglected to talk about, is like, you don't know this game, but you know this other game. It's like there's that old thing of like the best way screenwriters pitch a TV show is to say it's like TV show 1 meets TV show 2.
Yeah.
It's kind of the same thing of games where like I'll go back to Power Up Baseball. I think like a reason like that was a very popular story going around was that it was sold as like, you don't know this game, but you know NBA Jam.
Yeah.
This is NBA Jam, but it's baseball. Like, it's like...
Then like there's that connection there. Yeah.
Yeah, to have, like, those little connections really, really help. So definitely, like, if you're working on a game and you're saying, like, I'm just throwing something out of a hat here. It's like Sonic meets Halo. People be like, I know Sonic. I know Halo. Okay, I'm gonna play this. Like,
and that's a really good, quick elevator pitch of people know those two things and they can connect them instantly.
Yeah.
Do you have to do that a lot when you're talking about a game like what was that Sega VR game that you got your hands on? I can't remember the name right now.
Nuclear Rush.
Nuclear Rush. No one's played this before, so like, how did you go around communicating what it was? Again,
like, it's just doing the elevator pitch of like, it's like X meets Y.
Okay,
but also like, and for that one specifically, it was a little more broad of like, you know VR, but did you know that this had a VR headset? Like,
that makes
like
sense.
You can get a little more broad with it. Like, like sometimes, cause with stuff like Nuclear Rush or Faceball, like the selling point is less like, this is like this game. It's like, you know this genre, or you know this platform, or you know this medium. Here's it on this.
Oh.
Here, it's X. Yeah, like X meets Y doesn't mean franchise meets franchise. It could also mean franchise meets platform, or like genre meets platform.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay, yeah.
That's really cool. So is there a game that you've wanted to write about but you couldn't find anything interesting, where you found it interesting but there wasn't enough there that you felt that you could write about?
Admittedly, like, I feel like I start on my questions with admittedly. No,
I say so a lot.
Yeah.
Every time I ask you a question, I start it with so.
Yeah. Well, no. Admittedly, everything I think of like, I wanted to write about this, and I looked into it, and there's nothing much there. It is stuff that just remains on the cutting room floor, so it kind of eludes me.
Yeah.
Like, there definitely is little stuff where it's just like, there's the fallbacks of like, what's notable about this game? Look at the credits. Who worked on it? Maybe they're attached to something. Like, is there a famous first to this game? If it's an unreleased game, that's always the selling point of like, why was this canceled? I have had more difficulties with stuff of like, I would really, really like to write about this, but especially because it's a touchy subject.
Oh,
like talking like, there are people that are like, I don't want to talk about this game, or like, I'm not interested, and I'm not interested in doing an interview. Especially like looking at unreleased projects, you don't really think about it, but like, it sucks to have a project canceled, and like, I won't name specifics, but I was once about to write an article for a thing, and I scrapped it because the first person I reached out to said, working on this game was the worst moment in my entire life. I worked on a project for a year and nothing came out of it, and it was the most depressed I've ever been in my entire life. I considered suicide.
Wow.
I'm sorry. I'm not like
That's...
I appreciate you looking into this, but I'm not comfortable talking about this moment in my life.
That would be rough. And then how do
and
you even write about it after that?
Well, I just don't.
Exactly.
Because I'm just like it's just a touchy subject, and I'm not going to poke a bear. But and it's just a good lesson. Reaching out to people and telling these stories to be very respectful of like, especially in canceled projects, talking about like, I'm aware this is a difficult subject. Are you comfortable doing an interview? And you get the opposite end of the spectrum of like, oh yes, absolutely, I loved working on this game. I'm happy someone's interested about this. Hey, I have a copy of this game. Maybe we could put it out. Like, yeah.
Yeah, where they're very excited because they've wanted to share this story about something they were so passionate about and that nobody knows about.
There's also the problem of NDAs, where some people are like, I would love to talk about this, but
I can't.
I can't. I truly can't.
Do you have any people anonymously talking to you, or do you?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's a part of the like being respectful is like in the initial like cold call. It's like, hey, would you like to be? You can be anonymous for this article if you're more comfortable. Which I've had a lot of people be like, I would love to talk, but don't put my name attached to this just in case.
Yeah.
A certain company, for privacy's sake, let's call them Schmintendo.
Don't want to poke that bear.
Even people who worked on games with them like 30 years ago, they're like, just in case. I think my NDA is expired, but just in case, please keep me anonymous. Like,
you don't want to make that company angry specifically.
Yes, just in case. Yeah, and then like Sega, on the other hand, people are like, yeah, I don't give a fuck. Yeah, that company doesn't exist anymore. Who cares? Like,
yeah, Sega seems like such a cool company with all this stuff where they're like, yeah, just do it.
Actually, I will give a shout out to I don't think they do it anymore, but I think it was Sega's Australian account, who randomly one day was like, hey, here's a thing from our archives, the original cover art to like Sonic 3 on file. Like for a period of time, one of Sega's like Twitter accounts, one of their official Twitter accounts, was just sharing old stuff. Like old test demos and like old art for like unreleased games and like internal newsletters and stuff like that. I think they stopped. I think they might have like laid off the guy who was doing that, but
that's so nice for archival though.
It was so good to have. Like to have that company officially doing that stuff, which I think a lot of companies are more interested in that now. I know Electronic Arts is an official archivist. Yeah. I think Bethesda does as well. There's a I think Pokemon Company has like there's an archivist and also like a lore keeper, where like it's the guy that like remembers like everything that happens in every game and every episode of the TV series for future use. Like it's a more common thing now to actually have like an on-site archivist or historian or storyteller to kind of keep these stories in line, and for marketing, like figure out what's interesting, figure out the hook to sell people on the new game.
That makes sense. And I imagine also a lot of these companies were probably gun shy about doing this back in the day, because they were using other companies' technologies or whatever, and so they couldn't share anything because it's like, well, this company still exists and they might sue us if we release this source code.
Source code specifically is a weird, touchy subject where it is like we can put out the version we built out of the source code of an unreleased game, but we can't release the actual source code. 90% of it is made by this guy who we have permission of, but the other 10% is owned by somebody else.
Yeah, so we licensed the audio thing from this company, and
Exactly. We licensed this clock.
We licensed the clock.
We licensed this clock code. We got it.
So that brings me to, what do you think of modern like app video games and archival? Because I know these apps update so much and you get these different versions of them. You can't really archive them all, but someone might be 20 years down the line go, oh man, I really liked this one version of Subway Surfer. And now it's just gone. That one doesn't exist anymore.
Apps are the absolute Wild West of video game preservation. There's a thing, I don't know what year it was, let's just say like 2010. Wired put out an article of the top 20 apps in 2010. I think 2 of them are accessible now.
Really?
The top rated games, like some of the biggest games you could think of, some of like the biggest like little novelty apps in like 2010, just completely inaccessible, right?
Yeah. They just don't even run anymore.
Yeah, like, and just like I think like a good example is like the whole like Flappy Bird thing of like, oh yeah, like you can't play Flappy Bird anymore, but everybody remembers Flappy Bird. Yeah. And like on the level of updates, it's complete Wild West. It's something. It's just a thing of like you can hardly do anything about it in the past. It's just the present. If you can just save your update save each update of on your phone, every game you have, don't delete stuff, create backups. Just future-proof your stuff.
But that's so difficult with the app stores just automatically updating.
Yeah, exactly. It's I think a good example is Minecraft Pocket Edition. Some of the earliest versions of Minecraft Pocket Edition are just completely lost. And I know
that's a huge one too.
Yeah, and there's whole communities dedicated to like I found version 1.506 of Minecraft on my brother's phone. Like people slowly but surely have been finding every single version of Minecraft Pocket Edition.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. I know. I thought about this because I play RuneScape, and people have been doing that with old game cache files. Is they go, oh, I booted up my old laptop, and there's this game cache from whatever year, and they share it, and that they can reconstruct parts of the old game from those.
I love that so much. I wish every game had a community like that.
Right?
I'm gonna do a little. This is a fun wraparound. I'm gonna tell an improv related story.
Do it.
Back in December, we had University of Calgary did a little charity show with a couple people, a couple of improv companies in Calgary, and also the U of A's improv group. And they came down, and so I for whatever reason, one of the performers at U of A had this bit where they would pull out the iBeer app on their phone. You know the iBeer app?
Yes, the one where you would tilt it. And it would
it's like the old app where it's like I'm so thirsty, and you would like tilt your phone, and it would be a little beer inside. So we were at a party afterwards, and every now and then it'd just be like, oh Dylan, I'm so thirsty. Yo, cheers. Yo Dylan, cheers. Oh, okay. And I'm like, oh man, that's so funny. I'm gonna get that on my phone too. And I go in the App Store, and it's not there.
No.
It's gone. And I remember having this app when I was like 8 years old.
Same.
Like, when I had an iPhone at a too young age. And I'm like, oh, how do you have this app? And I'm like, they're like, I've had this since I was a kid. I just never got rid of it.
And it still works. That's ridiculous. But I remember having it on my old iPod Touch.
Yeah, just old novelty stuff like that. Yeah, it's crazy. Like.
And they're just lost to time unless somebody saved it somewhere. And then they also have to upload it, too. They have to realize, I've got something valuable. I need to preserve this.
And this is a thing that both of us know this app, but we don't have the app.
Yeah. And we have no way to access the app unless someone put it online.
It's like it's on the same version of, it's like on the same level as like, I'm trying to think of a movie, but like, if everybody knows the movie Star Wars, but no one has a copy of it, like
that would be a tragedy.
Yeah, like
you just had to be there.
Exactly. You have to be there for the iBeer craze of 2008. Like, it's
Oh, go ahead.
It's just like people don't think about it, but like video games actually are like the biggest entertainment medium right now.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the exact percentage, but it's like quadrupled like the movie and TV industry.
Yeah.
And despite all that, and despite being like a relatively new industry, let people get into semantics about like when was the first video game, but let's say like 1950s, 1960s, it's a relatively new industry. And despite that, it's so badly preserved.
It
Like
really
we don't
is.
like we've lost so much. Like they're like, and honestly, like archivists, admittedly no one likes to say this, but like pirates, all the hacking and emulation scenes, like
Mm-hmm.
it's they've all done a commendable job of kind of trying to save this stuff before it's too late. And
Oh,
again, like
absolutely.
we don't want to learn from our mistakes. So I
Yeah.
would say for people listening to this, if you have any old apps on your phone, don't delete them. Save them. Save every update on every device.
If you've got old phones kicking around that still work, maybe back those up
Oh,
too.
yes, please. I beg of you. You can't tell, but I'm doing a little prayer thing with my hands. I'm
Yes,
begging. Like,
please do it. I'll have to go and look
please.
through my old phones now that I'm thinking about it and save them.
Yeah, it's everybody can do their part.
Yes. Yeah. And even if it's just as simple as having that Internet Archive browser extension, I've recently put it on all my computers because I was just thinking about it the other day and I was going, I need to save some of these things. And it's just a zero effort way of just you browsing the web as you normally do, and the extension will automatically save it. Oh,
Yeah, it's
yeah. Okay.
yeah. Like I have nothing else to add other than like save your apps,
Save
your
them.
computers, save them before they're begging like.
Yes, before their hard drives fail from age.
Oh god, yeah. Backups, hard drives, everything.
Do
There's
it.
stories to be told. You may not think there's stories, but everything has a story. You just gotta find it.
One thing that's really cool about GitHub is they back it up and store it all underground every year or so,
Ah, yeah.
which I find really cool.
No.
They made like a little mini documentary on how they do it. They I think it's somewhere in the Arctic. They've dug a tunnel and they just back up GitHub and store it underneath there. I don't know if it's the whole thing, but yeah, there's just like little snapshots of GitHub.
I did not know that. Okay, I knew they had really expansive backups. I didn't know it was like in the Arctic, like how they preserve like flowers and stuff.
Yeah, they've got a thing like
Yeah.
that where they're doing a really good job of archiving what they can, and I think that's really awesome. And I wish more companies got involved with the archival process.
Yeah, if you could, yeah. I mean, again, it's only like the past like couple years or so. It's like people are starting to hire like company archivists and historians and storytellers.
Mhm.
And then yeah, if they had like I guess the Internet Archive is probably one of the closest things we have that are like the Library of Congress.
Yes.
It is like, hey, if you want to donate stuff to archivals, reach out. Like we're open arms. I will say though, there is people have been fighting hard for this in the past couple of years, but there's been some DMCA hearings. You might have heard of this, where
a little bit.
it's there's a weird issue with video games in museums where if you want to like bring out a movie or a book from a museum, you're allowed to do it like remotely. Like you can get like a digital file of a movie, or you can get like a PDF of the book.
Yeah.
You can't do that with a game. The only way that you can play an inaccessible game if it's in a museum is to go to said museum.
That's
You
really
can't
weird.
because it's issues with emulation and piracy, where it's like we're not going to send you a ROM of the game, like to play like, which is just a whole like, and people are trying to fight that, where it's like that's completely arbitrary. What are you talking about? Why am I able to like rent out Citizen Kane or War and Peace from a museum, but I can't play Super Mario Brothers?
You can't send me a ROM
yeah.
because you can rent a whole book, and that's
Yeah, exactly.
everything. That the whole book is
Yeah.
there.
Yeah, and yeah, so people have been fighting that. I believe it was hearings early in 2024, but they said no. But I think round two of
Oh,
negotiations happens in a couple years. And yeah, there was a big study was conducted by the VJHF of people came out with a huge study of like here's a list of historically significant games as per like Wikipedia and whatnot. How many of these are accessible today on modern platforms? I think 13%. Like
13.
87% of historically significant games are just not available to play at all.
Oh
And
no.
are they in museums? Are they preserved? Yes. Can an average citizen play it? No.
Not unless they go
Like
to the physical
no,
museum.
not unless they walk to the Library of Congress and then book a meeting and then go to a little room and sit in a chair and play Super Mario Brothers 2. Like
That's insane.
yeah, insanity. And it's here's hoping things will change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably a good note to end this podcast on. Is there anything you'd like to shout out? Any social media, any websites, any articles you're particularly proud of that you'd like to shout out here?
Um, Nothing immediately off the dome. If you want to reach out to me personally, I am Dylan Parker Mansfield on Instagram. That's Dylan Parker Mansfield on Instagram. Just some social stuff there if you just want to see what I'm doing
I can link
in
some
my
of that
life.
in
But
the
I'll also
description. Want to send it to me?
yeah, I'll also be sure to just post some stuff when it comes out.
Ooh.
If you want to see more of my writing, Did You Know Gaming, which I didn't really talk about much here. Bit of a household name, been doing stuff since like early YouTube, but I've been doing some stuff with them more recent times. They've shifted a lot from like fun facts about Zelda to like more journalistic stuff. Again, like reaching out to the developers, doing interviews, oral histories, unreleased games, a whole bunch of fun stuff happening over there. I got a lot of stuff in the works right now that hopefully should be out by the end of this year. Very big projects, lots of interviews for one thing. I think I'm at interview number 30. It's going to be a very comprehensive video on what it's a surprise.
Ooh, that's exciting.
Um, and
You'll send it to us when it comes out and we'll share it for you too.
yes, awesome, love that. And so yeah, Dylan Parker Mansfield, Did You Know Gaming, just for funnies because we went on a 10-minute tangent about it. You guys should follow UFC Improv on Instagram.com.
Do it.
If you want, if any of the listeners are in Calgary, you guys should come to a show.
Yes, they're good.
Because-
I've seen them.
please check out our marketing, which I do some of it. I get a little blue there. I get a little goofy. But yes, I think that's about it for plugs. So
awesome. Thank you
yes.
so much. And,
Yes, always a pleasure.
all right.
Yes.
Have a good one. Goodbye. I'm gonna just stop recording now.
Yes.